100 years ago today, good evening chaps, November the 10th, 1920 of course, the body of the unknown warrior arrived in London Victoria, as we call it nowadays, the train station just down the road from Buckingham Palace, having been brought over from France by the warship HMS Verdun, which must have been an awfully brand new ship, and came up from Dover, and the casket lay in the station overnight and was then taken, of course, to Westminster Abbey, where he has lain ever since. In those days, though the Edwardian era, of course, was shattered and lost technically in 1910, when the king died, Bertie, Edward VII, and of course, we got George V all the way through to 36. There was still an Edwardian / late Victorian feel about the country. I mean, when the Titanic sunk in 1912, it was seen as the true end of the Edwardian era, and if that hadn't finished it off, then the start of the First War in 1914 definitely put the kibosh on it. In those days, either way, whatever the era, we, or the British of the day, treated such moments with reference. But now we do, of course, we still have the armistice there, we still have Remembrance Sunday and various other bits and pieces, all of which coronavirus has affected. I think this year was the first Remembrance Sunday with no veterans marching past, probably since it all began in 1920. Either way, obviously no one knows the identity of the unknown warrior. He's believed to have been British, of course, because the French have got their unknown warrior, and he was brought over from France, as I say, and ended up at Victoria Station on platform 8. Last year I discovered a plaque by platform 8, because admittedly Victoria's a really weird looking station at the best of times. I say weird looking. You got, I think it's the first few platforms, I don't know, I always get my numbers confused. This is another thing. You got a bit where platform 8 is, the train's coming this far into the concourse, and then you walk towards Buckingham Palace Road and exit entrance, and there's platforms down here, and you think, well, so be it. But you look at Waterloo's like a kind of line Marylebone was, until they brought in the new platforms a few years ago. And apparently when Victoria opened in the 1840s or whatever, it was two separate stations technically, ran by competing companies, and in those days companies were a lot more competitive than they are now, to the point that that's why London is a mess in terms of railway networks, and why neighbourhoods spur out and all the rest of it. So where platform 8 is not readily apparent, because you've now got what they call the Island, which has got Wetherspoons and Costa, W.H. Smith and a few other bits, and tucked in behind Costa, if you come around the back of it, to go across the barrier, say, is a plaque on a wall, and platform 8 looks like it's still relatively the same on one side anyway as it may have been a century ago, because it's got a brick wall running down the side which passengers kind of light off, and then you've got the other platforms, as I say, and the plaque says essentially this is where the unknown warrior came into London, and then last week before last, they has sprung up a flyer and a few pictures. Now the pictures only seem to show the tomb itself at the Abbey. There didn't seem to be any none of them, I don't think, were pictures of Victoria Station, and rather curiously they took all of this down a week ago, Monday, November the 2nd. So either somebody pinched them, or they were being blown about, or I don't know. But either way, the flyer essentially explained how it came over, and that every year apparently there's a ceremony of remembrance there. The unknown warrior, as I say, was part of this sort of reference that I can't see happening now. If, say, we had had a massive war, or even say, I don't know, the Falklands War or something, you couldn't see in the 80s the government or someone, whoever was responsible for the unknown warrior coming over, saying, let's bring back somebody that we can't identify from the Falklands and honour him as representing the ultimate sacrifice made by those that did die in the Falklands or Afghanistan. But First World War sort of carved this niche into the psyche of the British people, of course. A great many young men died, and it affected things for a couple of generations, because there was obviously all these young men that had disappeared into the war and never came home. But also, Spanish flu was still happening. You know, people bitching about lockdown and stuff. Don't know they're living. Spanish flu was a lot worse in terms of the illness, anyway. It went off to the Abbey in the morning, the 11th, and it's been there ever since. And when the Queen's parents got married in 1923 at the Abbey, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, as she was when she was marrying Prince Albert, our future George VI, the Queen's father and mother, as I say, she laid her bouquet at the tomb, starting a tradition that has carried on ever since. And indeed, I remember still of the wedding of William and Kate, when Kate came in to the Abbey through the entrance where people visitors, tourists usually exit. She left her bouquet there before going down the aisle. Whenever visiting world leaders are in London, they usually are taken to the Abbey. Trump was last year during the state visit and all the rest of it. The French did, I think, earlier this year, when they came over to mark the anniversary of de Gaulle effectively starting up the resistance movement in England in July 1940. And I've only ever seen it once. I only went into the Abbey for the first time last November as part of a work thing, because I'm a tour guide, and we got free tickets. The idea, it was a familiarisation thing, as they branded it, so we knew what we were talking about, and I leapt at the chance, because I've never been in the Abbey, and nowadays the tickets are quite expensive for somebody on a tight budget. And, you know, walking all over, and it was very moving. The Battle of Britain Chapel was, where Cromwell's body once lain until it was dug up in 1660 or 1661. And then as you leave, and there's the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior just past this tablet for Churchill, and about 1940. And it's the one part of the Abbey you can't walk on, because the Abbey being the Abbey, almost over 1,000 years old originally, there are so many people buried there that, you know, in Poets' Corner you are walking on Charles Dickens and Newton and the rest of them, in theory anyway, and Hawkins' ashes. Whereas the Unknown Warrior, obviously you can't, and we still showing that reverence and respect. So the great shame about today, really, I think, because I think I would have been, no, it's a Tuesday, is that I can't see this in action, because little bits of tradition do fascinate me. So that's the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior, and as I say, we don't know who he is, and that's the idea of him. And hopefully in another 100 years, if we've made it as a species, and the Abbey's still standing, my great-grandchildren's generation or whatever, if I haven't even got children, I don't think I will ever at the rate I'm going, will walk into the Abbey to pay their respects one day to him. And that's what we should remember, I think. Not in a flag-waving, patriotic, jingoistic way, but this man, and many like him, died in the name of freedom in a war that, you know, is still debated to this day about the merits compared to the good versus evil description of the Second War. And we should never forget all of those who have died in the name of freedom and serving this country, because they probably didn't want to go to war. I mean, certainly after the hysteria of people rushing to join up in 1914 became eventually those that did not want to go because of the way the war had gone, and was a lot of people dying, of course, en masse. And you should never forget those in the Second War and all those afterwards, all the way till now. A soldier goes where he's told to, or a sailor and an airman. And so this chap died, and the greatest tragedy in a way is that we don't know who he is, just that he died for us, or at least my great-grandparents' generation. So there we go. Thank you for watching this rather amateurish Brian Walden style video. And we'll see if there's any more coming as the year rolls to an end. Well, it turns out I was reading the paper after the original video about the Unknown Warrior, and the Times for a while now, on their letters pages, I can't remember if they started it in 2014 or not, have been doing clippings, quoting clippings that they've done a century previous. So obviously they got one for today, November the 10th, 1920. It's about the Unknown Warrior. So it sort of seems from the content a little bit different than what the flyer said at Victoria Station or what I've read online. So I will read it, if you forgive me for looking at it, because obviously I can't quote it. So it's headed The Unknown Warrior from the Times, November the 10th, 1920. From the field of France or Flanders, where his life was given for his country, the body of the Unknown Warrior is to be brought today to Boulogne. French delicacy, French memories of that comradeship in arms whose consummation France and we will celebrate tomorrow, will pay to the Unknown Warrior of the British peoples today the honours of a field marshal. After that, the Navy of Great Britain will take him to their care. French warships too escorting him and bring him to these shores for the homage of his king and his fellow countrymen, and for burial in the abbey with the great men resting there. They lived for their country, he died for his. Glorying to be unknown, as Archbishop Alexander said, or such as he in a poem which appeared in the Times during the South African War more than 20 years ago. In him countless memories gather and are hallowed. His honour is the honour that should have been given but could not be to the men whom war took and used and threw away. With him return in triumph today, all for whom the hope of the war was forlorn, all who saw not the fruit of their endeavour, all whose last regret was for the agony of those they left behind. Tears come with him that seem to have been shed bitterly and fain, and as his bier passes to its last resting place, there will be many who will hear in imagination in the mournings of nations throughout the world. Sad the homecoming of the Unknown Warrior must be, whetting again the sword edge of loss. But there is joy too that can vanquish sorrow, for the Unknown Warrior's coming reminds the nation that the cynicism, the dissolution, the weariness of the years since the armistice are ugly treacheries to the faith for which he and men such as he fought and died. The war was not for ease or creature comforts, or a life guarded against cares. It was a flaming of the unquenched fire of the soul of man, indignant against wrong and scornful of safety. The unknown soldier returns to English shores, bearing the banner of a victory greater than any victory of the sword. All that men can do honour the dead the nation will do tomorrow. For he dead, returning in the name of all who died, as he did, honours his country more than we, living, can honour him. A much more intricate way of saying what I tried to say, or partially said, and that's from the Times. So hopefully tomorrow, being November the 11th, 102 years as it will be since the war ended, there'll be something in the Abbey, hopefully. It is still, of course, a functioning church, or Royal Peculiar, to give it its technical name, meaning that it's, of course, a church of the royal, the Queen's, as opposed to actual Abbey. It's complications. The Unknown Warrior is not even the most recent person to be buried there, as I say, or at least have their ashes interred there, but one of the most memorable and sombre, I would say. So that was the tomb, or at least, sorry, that was the Unknown Soldier, or the Unknown Warrior, for whom some of us remain awfully grateful to. And as I said on the earlier portion, the great tragedy of it is that we don't know who he is. But then a great many people lost their lives in the war that we never will know, probably. So, being still still being the anniversary year of 1940, of course, various things are ahead of us, like the Second Great Fire of London of the 29th of December, one of the worst nights of the Blitz. Indeed, a few days away now from the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Coventry. And then, of course, we've got the new year of 2021 and anniversaries such as that of Russia, Pearl Harbor, the end of the Blitz, and anything and everything in between them. So for the second time, thank you.